So I mean, the Black Hand is still a thing, and they're still. I would say that they've picked up steam since the last book. So the human supremacist movement has grown quite a bit, and um, the monsters have gone into hiding as a result, right? So like with book two, I would say that the movement was building. People were doing some. There's like a scene in book two where um, the sister of someone that was killed is making a speech to a group of people and like building them, just drumming up energy and support for this anti-monster movement. And by book three, that movement is like in full swing. The Black Hand is everywhere, and monsters have gone into hiding. They've gone back into hiding to protect themselves. And so much of the book is set in Moon, which is a hidden monster settlement that the monsters are using to kind of hide out, but also build something for themselves, right? It's not just monsters in the settlement, it's also human allies. And so it's kind of a test ground for the world that they want to have, right? Where monsters and humans are living together side by side and um and building community together. But the the rest of the world is intruding in on this space, and so it's about how they respond to this intrusion from the outside in on many different levels. So I would say that it would have been really interesting if I had thought about building out different domiciles for each kind of monster. But really, what it looks like is I was kind of modeling it off of an intentional community, right? And so intentional communities are generally speaking, they try to create like a livable standard for everybody. And so it's much of the community is kind of it feels like a I would say very suburban, but out in the woods. If that makes any sense. So you can choose which kind of house you want to be in, and there's kind of variation in what the houses like how many people can live in a house, but they kind of look like the way that I described it in the book is like a Hollywood set. And so really what the purpose of the community isn't to isn't to look nice or have a ton of personality, but to try to be a testing ground for this kind of like cohabited space. And so there's a lot. It's very egalitarian. Everything is like intentionally like balanced in the same way, and so that's not the part that's particularly interesting. What's particularly interesting is the monsters that live there and how what they do with their spaces. There's a vampire in the series, Alex, and her space is very minimalist, but this is because she came out of like intelligence and the military, so she has like this background that makes her space very minimalist. There's a werewolf pack and they have a bookstore on the bottom of their house, and then they live on the upstairs, right? And so people from the community come to the bookstore, but they also do a lot of like shipping out of books and that sort of thing. So that looks a certain way. And then there's another a couple that have a jamboree, and so they have like their main house, and then they have like a jamboree house where they used to like make their jams and stuff like this. Another interesting part of the community is that there's a bunch of like working co-ops, like worker co-ops within the community. So the Jamboree is a co-op, it's co-owned, and the bookstore is a co-op, it's co-owned, and they kind of pool resources that way for the community. So some of the resources go to the community, some of the resources is kept for the individuals. But one of the characters in the story, Ridley, remarks on the fact that there's not really a lot to do with the money that they do make because they're kind of like a bottle world. They're locked away from everyone else. So there's not a lot. They're like accumulating resources that they don't know what to do with. And so part of the story is them figuring out what's the next step there. Some of the people that are now in Moon are humans, and they have a different perspective than the monsters, even though they're allied to the monsters. Some of them are formerly human and now they're monsters. So one of the characters, Ridley, for much of his life has been human, right? So he has a human perspective, but he's recently been turned into a werewolf and he's a part of a werewolf pack. And so he brings that perspective to it, right? Like he is not he hasn't abandoned the human side of him. Much of the monsters in this story have, you know, had some experience in the past being human. Not all of them, right? And so he brings that perspective with him to the community. He is kind of like stir crazy in the community because he actually does want to interact with the world and build community outside of just Moon. He just doesn't know how yet, right? He feels like he's like they've literally gone into hiding, but he feels like he's like in a box and he wants to be out of that box, right? And some characters have similar feelings, but for different reasons. The Black Hand in book two, I'm going to reference back to this character. There's a thing that happens in book one, and we get to see the perspective from the sister. Someone dies in book one. I'll say this vaguely so I don't spoil things. And the sister is talking about the fact that, like, this person died because of monster business, and no one will tell me what happened, right? And so, um, you can see that from a sister's point of view, how she would be angry and upset by this, how she would want justice, that sort of thing, right? The situation, um, regarding the disappearance is complicated, and she doesn't know that, but she doesn't know that. And so, from that perspective, you can see she might feel justified, and the reader might empathize with her for having that perspective. And Ridley, when he first starts out interacting with monsters, has an aversion to monsters, and he has to reckon with that, right? And so there's all of these people that I would say are like have very sympathetic points of view that are like opposed to monsters or uncomfortable with monsters or adjusting to the idea of monsters, right? All of that is happening. Um, but the Black Hand as an organization sort of acts as like this kind of like appendage to what is another organization that's acting behind them. And that organization that's acting behind them, I think, is split between people you might empathize with and people that you absolutely wouldn't. And there's like kind of an infighting within that organization about like the soul of the organization, what the organization is supposed to be doing. And so that to me is something you might be able to empathize with. Their goals are complicated. And so even though I have characters or I have groups that are doing really bad things, I try to represent them as like nuanced within the group, right? So like not everyone has the same motivations for why they're doing what they're doing. I mean, action is really hard to do, especially if you're doing action with a lot of moving parts and a lot of people in it, right? Like if you're doing like a one-on-one fight, um, that might to some degree be exciting because you have like one person on one side, one person on the other side. You might have a good sense of who you're rooting for or whatever, right? And you can kind of play that out, right? You don't, it's hard for a reader to get lost in two people punching each other. But if you're writing one community defending their home from another organization that's coming in, and there's another organization that has some investment in there, and there's another organization that's manipulating that community, then that becomes very like difficult and challenging to kind of block and parse and all of the moving parts of that. And so that was really hard. I actually had to do like, so I outline all my chapters, but I had to storyboard the climaxes, right? That, right? Like I had to be like, okay, I know what's happening in this climax. Where is everyone in space? What is each individual action that's happening? So I kind of wrote it like twice, if that makes sense, right? I had like a version of it that I wrote out that wasn't meant for anybody to see, but it was like, here's everything that's supposed to happen. Here's what people are thinking as it's happening. Here's where they are in space, that sort of thing. And then I wrote the actual version, the actual climax is off of that storyboarded climax, if that makes sense.
Did you have any favorite characters from either side?
I mean, I can answer that with both. So one of my favorite characters on the good side is a werecat named Aussie. Um, she's new. She's new to Ruin, but she's a sibling to a character that we've seen before, Tezcat the Wanderer. And so Aussie is tough, right? And she doesn't have like a lot of like hangups about what she needs to do. She will kill a person if she needs to. Where I think a lot of the other monsters come from civilized society and they struggle a little bit more with oh well, is it right to defend yourself in this way? And like Aussie is very much like, I'm going to defend myself. I'm going to defend my people, whatever. Even if the people don't want it, is how Aussie operates. Um, on the bad side, the antagonist side, there's a character named Smoke, and I actually think he's quite sympathetic. Um, he's a shadow mage, and what that means is that he is kind of like he's a he can like teleport to different, like he can turn his body into dust, and he can turn other things into dust, and he can move them, right? And he can move himself that way, and so he's actually really hard to fight. um he's a very difficult antagonist, and he's very smart. um and he presents himself as being very evil, but he's kind of leaning into what he thinks has been destined for him since he was a child. And that makes him complicated because he had something put on him before he even had like an idea to think differently. And he's kind of like throughout the series struggling against what people think he is and what he thinks he is. I mean, a big part of dialogue is always discovery, right? Like, I don't necessarily know what people are going to say, and sometimes people say things that surprise me. I know that sounds, I don't know, it always sounds weird talking about like characters as if they're separate people from you. But I honestly, and I think a lot of writers would have this experience of writing a character, and then the character just shows up in a way that surprises you. It's just like, oh, I didn't know you was going to say that. And so oftentimes I have to change my outline because a character does something that I'm like, oh, well, that changes a lot of things down the road. And I want to keep this. So, I'll change my outline to adjust to what people are saying. Um, yeah. And also, I mean, you have an idea of who a character is in your head, and then they start talking, and then you're like, oh, you're actually much different than I thought you were. Um, and so that happens as well. I often think readers, and this is fair, readers are coming from it from the reading perspective, and they don't always take into account like that writers are people, and you know they have certain attachments to the things that they're doing, but they also have certain challenges going through the thing. um and I learned a lot. I figured out a lot as I was working on this trilogy. Like, I didn't know I would be able to actually pull it off. And so much of my experience of the trilogy is like cycles of like excitement, fear, despair, relief, right? So like excited to start something and new, um, being afraid that I'm not going to actually be able to pull it off. Once I start doing it, I'm like, oh, this is actually really bad, and I don't know how to fix it. Despair that like, okay, now everyone's going to know I'm a fraud because I can't pull off this thing I said I was going to pull off. And then like muscling through that, or working through that, going through all the cycles of grief or whatever. And coming to the end and being super relieved that I was able to pull it off. And so I would say that finishing a trilogy is like that times three or times 10. Like it's like, oh, I didn't know I would be able to actually land this plane for this series. I'm not sure if I did. We'll see how readers respond. Um, I I'm super relieved that I got here. I'm super happy. I'm being proud of the thing too, like even with its warts and all, right? Because writing is messy. Um, but also feeling like a huge void has entered your life. Like now what? That definitely happened to me. Like right after I submitted it, there was like a month that I was still doing work. I had things to do, but like all my free time was filled up with like trying to fill the void I felt now. I was like, well, what am I gonna do with all of this like new space? And eventually I figured out what to do with the new space, but like for a while it was like staring into an abyss or something.